Religion is like a penis. It's okay if you have one. Just don't try to shove it down my throat. This is a funny atheist quote that perfectly describes how insanely unbearable a lot of religious zealots are. While we've all experienced overly religious people trying to convert us, at some point I think this quote actually applies far more to jobs than religion. We've all experienced those annoying Mormons walking around your neighborhood and knocking on your door. But these guys are child's play compared to everyone in society constantly pressuring you to get a job.
Pisses me off. I mean, this is just a thing where you just need to work.
Oh my God.
There's a deep-rooted lie that has permeated throughout most of society that from a moral standpoint, we should be forced to work. This lie has literally caused billions of people to be gaslit, exploited, manipulated, and in some cases, even killed. Gen Z, however, is the first generation to really stand up to this and dare to challenge the status quo, asking a question we should have asked a long time ago. Why should we be forced to work? They are absolutely right to ask this question, and in this video, we are going to directly challenge this long-time societal expectation. Part 1. Why should you just get things for free? A lot of people think we have to work. Otherwise, we can't afford to feed and house ourselves and everyone else. This is actually objectively false, as there's more than enough food to feed everyone in the world. And there's also plenty of empty houses just lying around that could house just about all the homeless as well. So it's not really even an economic issue here, as we could absolutely afford to cover everyone's basic living expenses. The reason we actively choose not to do it is because of this long-held belief of, why should you just get stuff for free? So let's explore this a bit. We didn't ask to or consent to being born. That's a fact. So if we didn't ask to be born, why is it that we're forced to endure a miserable existence, working a job we hate, just to support a society that doesn't care about us? We're constantly being told that we're entitled for not wanting to work. But this goes both ways. Society is equally as entitled for thinking it's entitled to 65 years of cheap labor from us. Entitlement is a two-way street, and it's time we start looking at it that way. Now, when you bring up this point, you frequently get met with a response of,
But society didn't ask you to be born either, so why should you just get free stuff?
this seems to be true on the surface level, which leaves us at a bit of a stalemate. On one hand, we didn't ask to be born. On the other hand, society didn't ask us to be born either. So who wins here? You knew something was coming, didn't you? You see that last thing I said there? That's actually not really true, is it? Society did, in fact, actually ask you to be born. How? Well, you see it around you every single day.
Advocates are sounding the alarm on America's baby bust as our country's birth rate hits a record low.
The decline of births is in a state of crisis. I believe we are at a time when we have to take urgent measures.
As we can see now, society is desperately begging on their hands and knees for people to have more kids. They've always done this, whether through religion and cultural norms, or just outright begging and pleading like they're doing now. This is the literal definition of asking you to be born. Now, if you ask someone to be born and then refuse to take care of them, what does that make you? If you're a guy who pressures your girlfriend or wife to have a kid, then you refuse to pay for the kid, people would call you a deadbeat, irresponsible loser, and rightfully so. So, since society did in fact ask you to be born, if it refuses to pay for you basic living expenses, which it absolutely can afford to do, that makes it an irresponsible, deadbeat loser of a society. This on top of the fact that this loser society, we live in hardcore pressures and shames you for not getting a job. But they themselves are too lazy to fix the economy and make it possible to even get a job in the first place. They can't guarantee everyone a job, but they want everyone to starve to death if they don't have a job. This is the epitome of laziness and entitlement. Part 2. The world was free to create. If you thought that was a great moral argument for why you should get free stuff, I got an even better one for you now. A much better one that you probably haven't heard yet. Whenever people ask me, why should you just get stuff for free? My response is always, Why should the government just get stuff for free? Think about it. The earth and the land we live on was free to create. Not only this, but there's an immeasurable amount of valuable resources that were free to create as well. Land, gold, food, water, oil, and much more. So I just have one question here. If all these valuable resources that are worth trillions of dollars were free to create, why is it that governments just get to move in and hog up all these valuable resources for free and sell it to their corporate buddies for trillions of dollars of profits? The government never paid for the land, the gold, the oil, the food and water that it took. It just took it for free. So, as you can see, people don't really have a problem with giving away free stuff. They only have a problem with you and me and decent everyday people getting free stuff. But they don't have a problem with corrupt politicians and their corporate sponsors getting trillions of dollars of free stuff every day. Why is this? Because they wear a fancy suit, I guess. Now I get that. From a practical standpoint, the government does have a role in regulating these resources. Otherwise, we would all fight for it, and insane amounts of violence and bloodshed would ensue. But if the government is going to hog up all these valuable resources that it never paid for free, it morally has an obligation to share a part of the profits with everyday people like you and me, and not just their corrupt corporate buddies. Call me crazy, but I believe we are all children of the earth, and we are just as entitled to its resources as corrupt politicians and corporations are. By the way, guys, quick announcement, we recently just launched memberships. So if you're interested in supporting the channel, check out our memberships tab. We know it's hard in this economy, so we've kept the prices low and very affordable. Our 3 membership tiers are bullshit wages, dog shit wages, and finally, the actual minimum wage. Part 3, the communism argument. Whenever you make one of these arguments that challenge the status quo, you're inevitably going to be hit with but communism in the comments section. Calling it right now, I guarantee there's going to be brainwashed NPCs commenting this on autopilot without even watching the video. When it comes to being forced to work, there's a very interesting irony with the whole communism argument here. The corporations they want you to work for are inherently the biggest communist entities ever. Think about it. Corporations are run by a CEO, who's an unelected authoritarian communist dictator. Just like dictators in communist countries, you can't vote him out no matter how big of an asshole he is. Just like in communist countries, everyone who works under him is equally poor and gets paid the same dogshit hourly wage while he benefits from all the profits. Just like in communist dictatorships, if you speak out against him, you'll be met with severe consequences. In authoritarian communist countries, speaking out against dear leader means you get met with an instant firing squad. In authoritarian communist corporations, speaking out against dear CEO means you lose your job, your ability to provide for yourself, and eventually you'll starve to death. I suppose it's a slower and more humane way to go, but the result is the same nonetheless. When I first graduated high school and started applying for jobs, like any teenager, I had some pretty edgy posts on social media. I was then told when I started applying for jobs that I should take them down as employers might not want to hire me if they see them. Even as a young and clueless 18-year-old, something really didn't sit right with me about this. And when I think about it all these years later, it finally makes sense. If my boss can dictate what I can and can't say on social media even when I'm not working, that means I literally don't even have freedom of speech anymore. And at that point, how is that any different from living under communism? I can understand if they want me to behave a certain way when I'm on the job, but if they're going to be controlling what I say in my own free time, this is literally as communist as it gets. Do me a favor and pay close attention the next time you visit a communist corporate entity, whether that's McDonald's or Walmart. Are they not exploiting their workers, who are all equally poor, just like under communism? Is everyone working there not being forced to wear the same clothes, never say anything bad about their leader, and put on the same fake smile, just like under communism? This is the incredible irony of the whole communism argument. The people who accuse you of being a communist are ironically the biggest communist defenders and supporters ever when it comes to their own communist corporations. Now, there's one final irony when it comes to all this, and this might be the biggest irony of them all. If we were able to guarantee everyone their basic living expenses so that they weren't forced to work, this is actually the most pro-free market thing you could do. Not only is this not communism, it's the only way out of the corporate communism we currently live under. Think about it. One of the reasons everyone is being paid such horrible low wages right now is because of the fact that you are forced to work. Otherwise, you'll go homeless and starve. This means that the average worker has absolutely no leverage negotiations-wise, which allows companies to pay them peanuts, treat them like dirt, disrespect them, and spit on them for the price of $7 an hour. And the person has no choice but to take it, otherwise he'll go homeless and starve. If everyone had their basic living expenses covered, this would actually give decent, everyday people the same free market benefits that corporations have. Now they would have the leverage to negotiate fair wages and working conditions for themselves without the threat of homelessness constantly looming over their heads. So, as you can see, covering everyone's basic living expenses isn't just not communist. It's actually very pro-free market. Part 4. Slavery with extra steps. I have a question for you. Are you morally against slavery? Do you believe slavery is inherently wrong and immoral? If you answered yes, then you already agree with the premise of this video, whether you're aware of it or not. This is a very politically incorrect point that often triggers a lot of people, but it doesn't change the fact that it's factually correct. But before we get into that, let me make something very clear. This is not meant to be historically insensitive to the plight of actual slaves throughout human history. When we think of slavery, the first thing that typically comes to mind is the horrific slavery of Black Americans in the 1800s. While this is undoubtedly a significant part of American history, it is a bit of a short-sighted view world history-wise. For example, slavery was a big part of the ancient Roman Empire as well, but it was a little more complicated there. There were undoubtedly slaves that were treated brutally and horribly, just like in America. But the Roman Empire also had slaves that were treated quite well, relatively speaking. Some slaves worked under brutal conditions in mines. Others actually worked as teachers and babysitters for the nobility, and they actually got to live in decent conditions. But what they all have in common is that they had no choice but to work and were exploited for their labor. So my point here is that just because today's modern slavery happens in better, more humane conditions, it doesn't change the fact that it's still slavery and still something we universally agree is immoral and supposedly abolished a long time ago. Before we continue, let's clearly define what slavery exactly is, as it's important for terms to be clearly defined. According to Anti-Slavery International, at Anti-Slavery International, we define modern slavery as when an individual is exploited by others for personal or commercial gain. Whether tricked, coerced, or forced, they lose their freedom. This includes but is not limited to human trafficking, forced labor, and debt bondage. I'm sure you see where this is going by now. If you have to work or you'll starve, how is this any different from coercion? This is what people mean when they say, the modern economic system is just slavery with extra steps. They have many mechanisms of gaslighting you and dangling the illusion of freedom in front of your nose like a carrot. For example, they'll say that you can change your job if you don't like it, except you really can't with how bad the job market is. Or the idea that you can quit your job if you don't like it, except you really can't, because you'll starve to death if you do. The overwhelming majority of people hate their jobs and just do it because they need the money. It's not like the thought of quitting their jobs just never crossed their minds. This just proves that the whole notion of freedom is a complete illusion for 99% of people, and they use the rare exceptions of the 1% who got lucky and made it out to be like, hey, you can do it too. Part 5. We don't have a problem with rich people who don't work. The idea that we shouldn't have to work might sound like something new and revolutionary, but it really isn't when you think about it. You see, we've never really had a problem with people not working. We only have a problem with poor people not working. As this comment puts it perfectly, Rich and not working. Okay, poor and not working. Scandal. The people who are constantly calling you lazy for not wanting to work only have a problem with poor people being lazy and not wanting to work. But when their rich buddies are lazy and don't want to work, no one bats an eye. Why is this? The main reason society only has a problem with poor people not working is because of a deep-rooted lie that when rich people don't work, it's because they first put in the work and earned the right to not work, while the poor are stealing taxpayer money. But there are so many ways this is just completely false. Let's start off with the fact that governments have spent trillions of dollars bailing out the failed businesses of the rich. This is taxpayer money. This is money that the average working class person has to pay for. And the trillions of dollars spent to bail out these rich welfare parasites of society completely dwarfs the couple $100s or so of food stamps that some guy living in his mom's basement who can't get a job receives. I get that we're all struggling in this economy and that it can feel frustrating when you're already barely getting by, and then when you get taxed, it can be really tempting to blame the poor who are on welfare. What I don't get, however, is that there's absolutely no blame or anger towards the rich welfare parasites of the world, who are a way bigger drag on your taxes and your overall income. But this isn't even close to the biggest way in which the rich are way bigger welfare parasites who steal way more money than the poor. The biggest way the rich steal from you is simply through your hourly wages. If you are being paid an hourly wage, whatever it is, 10, 12, 15 an hour or whatever, your boss is exploiting you and stealing from you. And here's how. Let's say you're working your first job after high school at a local McDonald's. If you were actually being paid a fair wage based on the economic value you were producing, you'd be paid based on how many burgers you flipped, not how many hours you worked. The fact that you're being paid the same $10 an hour or so, no matter how many burgers you flip or how much value you bring to the company, proves that your boss is outright legally stealing money from you. None of this is my own personal opinion, by the way. These are all economical and statistical facts that can be verified. This graph right here shows that workers have been getting paid far below their productivity, aka the economic value they bring to the company since the 1970s. In fact, if wages were correlated to productivity, the minimum wage would be $24 per hour today. This means that the rich are actively stealing at least $17 per hour every day from each and every one of their employees. If that still isn't enough proof for you that the rich are stealing way more money than the poor, consider this. At this point, it's not just unemployed people without a job who are on welfare. A lot of people who have full-time jobs have still found themselves needing to rely on welfare in this economy. Needless to say, if their bosses paid them a decent enough wage, they wouldn't need to be on welfare benefits in the first place. So, if you want to blame someone, you can blame their bosses for not paying them enough. So, as you can see, we don't really have a problem with people not working and stealing money from others. We only have a problem when poor people do it. When rich people do it a million times worse, no one bats an eye. We don't really have a problem with income redistribution either. Every day, billions of dollars worth of labor are redistributed from the poor to the rich. We only have a problem with it when it's the other way around. This is the ultimate point of this whole section. If the rich aren't being criticized for not working while stealing money from others, then you and I shouldn't be either. Conclusion. This is the ultimate moral argument for why we shouldn't be forced to work. If you're a young Zoomer watching this, understand that your generation is absolutely right for questioning why we're being forced to work. And the next time someone criticizes you for not wanting to work, you can show them this video, or better yet, remember the talking points here well enough to refute them yourself. Once enough of us wake up and reject all the lies society has told us, that's when true change can finally begin.